Every morning at 7 a.m., he was there. Shady Oaks Nursing Home didn't pay him a dime, but Harold Chen never missed a day. The staff thought he was just another lonely retiree looking for company. The residents called him the nice Korean man who helped with their breakfast and listened to their stories. But when 92-year-old Frank Morrison started crying while looking at an old Army photo, Harold quietly sat down beside him and said 4 words that changed everything. I was there too. Welcome to the Human Stories. Before we continue this powerful story of service, sacrifice, and the brotherhood that transcends generations, tell me in the comments from which city in the world are you watching this video today. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be remembered, hit that subscribe button and help us honor those who served in wars history almost forgot. Shady Oaks Nursing Home in Springfield, Ohio was Harold Chen's second home. For 8 years, the 78-year-old had volunteered there every morning, helping residents with breakfast, reading newspapers, and listening to their stories. The staff appreciated his quiet dedication. The residents loved his gentle patience. What nobody knew was that Harold carried his own stories from Korea, from a war most Americans had forgotten. Frank Morrison, a 92-year-old Marine veteran, was Harold's most challenging resident. Frank complained about everything and trusted no one. But today was different. Frank sat on his bed, crying over a black and white photograph. "Frank, what's wrong?" Harold asked, sitting down beside him. The photo showed 8 young Marines in 1942, arms around each other's shoulders, grinning at the camera. "My squad from the Pacific," Frank whispered. "Jimmy Sullivan, Tommy Rodriguez, Pete Kowalski." His finger traced each face. "And Eddie Nakamura, Japanese-American kid whose family was in internment camps while he fought for America. Best Marine I ever knew." Frank's voice broke. "They all died. Guadalcanal, Iwo Jima, Okinawa. Why did I survive when better men didn't?" Harold looked at the photograph, then at Frank's tortured face. After 8 years of silence, he made a decision. "Frank," Harold said quietly, "I was there too." Frank stopped crying. "You were where?" "Not the Pacific, Korea. I know about survivor's guilt. I know about carrying names you can't forget." For the first time in 8 years, Harold Chen told someone he was a veteran. Word spread through Shady Oaks faster than wildfire. The quiet volunteer was a Korean War veteran, Task Force Smith, the first American unit sent to stop the North Korean invasion. By afternoon, Harold found himself surrounded by residents he'd never known were veterans. Bill Patterson, who'd barely spoken in 2 years, wheeled up in his chair. "Task Force Smith?" Bill asked. "I was 8th Army Artillery. We tried to support you boys at Osin, but we couldn't get close enough." Dorothy Walsh, sharp-eyed and tough, rolled up next. "I was an Army nurse, MASH unit outside Seoul. We treated your casualties." One by one they gathered, veterans who'd been hiding in plain sight. Frank Morrison with his Pacific Campaign ribbons, Thomas Bennett, who revealed he was a Tuskegee Airman, Maria Santos, whose husband died in Vietnam. "Why didn't any of us talk about this before?" Dorothy asked. Harold looked around the circle of old soldiers. "Because we thought nobody wanted to hear about old wars. But we're here now. We can tell our stories." Frank spoke up. "Harold, you said you knew about survivor's guilt. What happened in Korea?" Harold took a deep breath. "I lost my squad leader, Johnny Walsh from Nebraska. Kid died in my arms at Chosin Reservoir. I promised him I'd tell his family how brave he was, but I never had the courage." "Why not?" Frank asked. "Because I've been carrying his letters home for 70 years, too afraid to face his family." The room fell silent. Dorothy leaned forward. "Harold, what would Johnny want you to do with those letters?" Harold thought about it. "He'd want me to deliver them. He'd want his family to know he wasn't forgotten." "Then that's what we do," Frank said. "We help you keep that promise." That night, Harold sat in his apartment staring at a shoebox he'd kept for 70 years. Inside were Johnny Walsh's letters home, 23 letters written to his mother in Nebraska, letters Harold had never found the courage to mail. The last letter, dated 3 days before Johnny died, was the hardest to read. Dear Ma, I don't know if this will reach you, but we're moving to the reservoir tomorrow. I wanted you to know I'm not scared of dying. I'm scared of letting down the other guys, especially my squad leader, Harold Chen. He takes care of all of us. Ma, if something happens to me, I want you to know I was with good people. Harold promised to make sure I don't die alone, and Harold always keeps his promises. If you ever meet Harold Chen, thank him for me. Thank him for bringing me home. All my love, Johnny. Harold wiped away tears he'd been holding back for 70 years. Johnny hadn't blamed him for failing to keep him alive. Johnny had thanked him for staying. The next morning, Harold brought the letters to Shady Oaks. The veterans gathered around as he read Johnny's final message. You didn't fail him, Frank said firmly. You stayed with him. You made sure he wasn't alone. That's what brothers do. Dorothy pulled out her phone. Harold, what was Johnny's last name? Let's find his family. Walsh, from Nebraska. Within an hour, Dorothy had found Mary Walsh Mitchell, Johnny's little sister, now in her 70s. Harold's hands shook as he dialed the number. Mrs. Mitchell, this is Harold Chen. I served with your brother Johnny in Korea. The voice on the other end began to cry. Mr. Chen, I've been waiting for this call my whole life. 2 weeks later, a charter bus pulled away from Shady Oaks carrying 8 residents on their first trip in years. Harold sat in back wearing his old Army dress uniform. Frank wore his Marine blues. Dorothy had found her nursing corps uniform in storage. The drive to Nebraska took 8 hours, but nobody complained. These weren't nursing home patients anymore. They were veterans on a mission. Mary Walsh Mitchell was waiting at the family farm when they arrived. She walked straight to Harold and hugged him. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for bringing him home. The memorial service was held in the backyard under oak trees Johnny had probably climbed as a child. 50 family members had gathered, children, grandchildren, neighbors who'd known Johnny as a boy. Harold stood before them, his voice steady and clear. Johnny Walsh was the best soldier I ever served with. Not because he was the strongest, but because he cared about others more than himself. He told them about Johnny's courage, his kindness, his final words about home and family. He handed Mary the bundle of letters her brother had written 70 years ago. These belong to you, Harold said, but more than that, they're proof that a farm boy from Nebraska became a hero in a place most Americans never think about. As Mary read her brother's letters aloud, Harold felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The guilt he'd carried for 7 decades was finally gone. Johnny's nephew, a young man about his uncle's age when he died, approached Harold after the service. Mr. Chen, I'm thinking about joining the Army. What would Uncle Johnny want me to know? Harold looked at this young man with the same earnest eyes Johnny had possessed. He'd want you to know that service isn't about glory. It's about taking care of the people around you. And the best soldiers fight not because they hate what's in front of them, but because they love what's behind them. The bus ride back to Ohio was quieter, but it was a satisfied quiet. They'd completed their mission. Harold realized something had changed, not just for him, but for all of them. They weren't just nursing home residents anymore. They were veterans who'd rediscovered their purpose. Back at Shady Oaks, Harold started something new. Every Tuesday afternoon, the activity room became the Story Circle, a place where veterans could share their experiences with each other and with visitors. Frank told stories about Eddie Nakamura and the guilt he'd carried for 70 years. Dorothy shared memories of MASH unit surgery and the lives she'd helped save. Thomas Bennett spoke about being a Tuskegee Airman, fighting for a country that didn't treat him as an equal. But the most important stories weren't about battles or medals. They were about brotherhood, about taking care of each other, about the bonds that connect soldiers across generations and conflicts. A young filmmaker named Jennifer Walsh, Johnny's great-niece, came to document their stories. Her film, The Story Circle, won awards and sparked a national conversation about veteran care and memory preservation. The Ohio Department of Veterans Affairs asked Harold to help expand the program statewide. Soon, story circles were operating in nursing homes across the country. But Harold was most proud of something simpler. His fellow veterans had found their voices again. They'd remembered that their stories mattered, that their service had meaning, and that the mission never really ends. It just changes form. 5 years later, Harold Chen, now 83, sat in the storyteller's chair one final time. The activity room was packed. Residents, families, students, active-duty military personnel who'd come to listen and learn. "When I first started volunteering here," Harold said, "I thought I was just helping elderly people pass time. What I learned was that time doesn't pass, it accumulates. Every story we tell becomes part of who we are." He looked around the room at young faces, eager to learn, and old faces ready to share. "I came to Shady Oaks carrying guilt about a friend I couldn't save. But my fellow veterans taught me something. Surviving isn't something to feel guilty about, it's something to feel responsible for." Harold gestured toward the plaque beside the door. "The Harold Chen Story Circle, where memory becomes mission." "The mission continues," he said, "because as long as there are people willing to serve something larger than themselves, there will be stories worth telling. And as long as there are people willing to listen, the service never really ends." After Harold stepped down from the program, the Story Circle continued under new leadership. The model expanded nationwide, connecting elderly veterans with their communities and preserving oral histories for future generations. Harold's legacy wasn't just in the stories he'd helped preserve, but in the understanding he'd fostered. That nursing homes aren't just places where people wait to die. They're libraries of experience, filled with heroes whose stories can still change the world. On Harold's final day volunteering at Shady Oaks, he received a letter from Mary Walsh Mitchell's grandson, the young man who'd asked about military service at Johnny's memorial. "Dear Mr. Chen, I graduated from Army Ranger School last month. Throughout training, whenever things got tough, I remembered what you said about Uncle Johnny, that the best soldiers fight for what they love, not what they hate. I wanted you to know that Uncle Johnny's legacy lives on. His letters are displayed at our local VFW hall, and his story inspired me to serve. But more than that, your Story Circle model has been implemented at the VA hospital where I'm stationed. You kept your promise to Uncle Johnny. You brought him home, and you made sure he wasn't forgotten. But you did something more. You taught us all that the mission of caring for each other never ends. Thank you for showing us what true service looks like. Respectfully, Lieutenant Michael Walsh, 75th Ranger Regiment." Harold folded the letter carefully and placed it in his jacket pocket, next to the challenge coin Frank Morrison had given him years ago. Through the window of his small apartment, he could see Shady Oaks in the distance, where new volunteers were carrying on the work he'd started. The Korean War had been called the Forgotten War, but Harold Chen had made sure it wasn't forgotten at Shady Oaks. More importantly, he'd proven that service doesn't end when you take off the uniform. It just finds new ways to make a difference.